In 2025, during a scientific conference in Dallas, a neurosurgeon presented evidence that could revolutionize our understanding of death and the human mind. We're not talking about abstract philosophy, but clinical data that addresses the greatest mystery of our existence. What happens to our consciousness when the biological hardware, the brain, stops functioning? I analyzed this presentation for you because it offers a rare perspective. In the description, you'll also find the link to the complete conference. The speaker is Dr. Michael Egnor, a surgeon with over 30 years of experience and approximately 7,000 brain surgeries under his belt. His is not a vision based on personal beliefs, but a conclusion reached starting from a strictly materialist training. Through observation in the operating room, he came to question the dogma that the mind is merely a byproduct of the brain. Before we begin, if you're interested in these topics treated with scientific rigor, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The starting point of this analysis is clinical cases that challenge traditional medical logic. According to the classical model, the mind is what the brain does. Therefore, if you remove much of the brain, you should remove much of the mind. But the data says otherwise. The neurosurgeon shows us baffling MRI scans. We see the case of a girl born with approximately 2/3 of her brain missing. The scans show black fluid where there should be gray matter. Yet this girl has normal cognitive development. Then there's Joshua's case, also born without approximately 2/3 of his brain mass. Doctors doubted he could survive, yet today he's a high school graduate and perfectly functional. Or Maggie, who despite the absence of central brain regions, earned a doctorate. Finally, Nicholas, who survives only with his brainstem, lacking both hemispheres. Although he has severe motor disabilities, he maintains intact emotional awareness. He laughs, cries, interacts. He is present. If the brain were the sole generator of consciousness, like a computer generates a program, cutting the hardware in half should destroy the software. Instead, in these cases, consciousness finds a way to operate. It's as if the signal doesn't come entirely from the antenna. Let's step back to the work of Wilder Penfield, a pioneer of 20th century neurosurgery. Penfield operated on awake patients, electrically stimulating different areas of the brain to map them. He discovered that by stimulating certain zones, he could make an arm move, make someone perceive a smell, or evoke a vivid memory. But there was one thing he could never provoke: abstract thought. No electrical stimulation ever forced a patient to do mathematical reasoning or reflect on logic. Penfield found centers for vision, for movement, for language, but never found a center of reason. We've mapped the genome and photographed black holes, but we can't locate where our capacity to reason resides. The hypothesis advanced is radical. Perhaps we don't find it because it's not there. Higher executive functions might not be produced by brain tissue, but only processed by it. Another formidable proof comes from studies on split brain patients. In cases of extreme epilepsy, the corpus callosum is cut, physically separating the right hemisphere from the left. Roger Sperry, Nobel Prize winner, and subsequently researchers like Justine Surgeon and Pinto demonstrated something incredible. By presenting different visual information to the two separated hemispheres, for example, an arrow on the right and one on the left, patients could still integrate this information. If one hemisphere saw a rock and the other a window, the patient understood the implicit story. The rock broke the window. But how is this possible? Physically, the two hemispheres no longer communicate. There's no neural bridge. If the mind were only the result of physical connections, integration would be impossible. The fact that these patients maintain a single unified consciousness suggests that the mind transcends the physical connection of tissues. The mind seems to operate as a field that unifies what matter has divided. we arrive at the question of free will. Benjamin Libet's experiments are famous. They show that brain activity begins milliseconds before we are conscious of wanting to perform a simple action. It seemed like the end of free will, but Libet also discovered the veto power. Although the impulse starts from the brain, the subject can stop it at the last instant. And for this veto, there is no preceding preparatory brain activity. The ability to say no to one's biological impulses doesn't seem to have a traceable neural origin. Furthermore, during Penfield's operations, when the surgeon stimulated the motor area, making the patient's arm rise, the patient said, "You did it." When the patient raised it voluntarily, they said, "I did it." The brain doesn't deceive its owner. There is a clear neurological and phenomenological distinction between being an automatic mechanism and being a conscious agent. The agent, the one who decides, doesn't seem to coincide entirely with the biological organ. The resilience of consciousness is also evident in Adrian Owen's studies on patients in vegetative states. People considered absent, devoid of mental activity, were placed in functional MRI when asked to imagine playing tennis or moving around the house. Brain areas activated exactly as in healthy subjects. Approximately 40% of these patients are conscious, trapped in an inert body, capable of doing calculations and answering yes/no questions by modulating their own brain activity. Consciousness persists even when the bodily interface is broken, but the most extreme proof comes from NDEs, near-death experiences. The surgeon cites data according to which approximately 20% of NDEs are veridical. That is, verified. Pam Reynolds' case is emblematic. During a cardiac arrest operation, with the brain deprived of blood and electrical activity zeroed out, therefore clinically dead, the patient reported accurate details of surgical instruments and conversations that occurred while she was off. A fascinating statistical detail concerns visions of the deceased. In NDEs, people often encounter relatives or friends. Medical literature does not report a single case in which the subject saw, in this dimension, a person who was still physically alive. They only see those who have already died, including recently deceased relatives whose death the subject couldn't have known about. If it were a hallucination of the dying brain fishing from memories, why this iron rule? Why doesn't the brain hallucinate the living person to whom they're most attached? This suggests that the experience might not be an internal projection, but access to an external reality. Today there's much talk about artificial intelligence, but the speaker makes a clear distinction. The mind is not computation. Computation is syntax, manipulation of symbols according to rules. The mind is semantics, understanding of meaning. Software can process a text on any subject without understanding its sense. Our consciousness, instead, has intentionality. Every thought is referred to something. This ability to attribute meaning is absent in purely physical or computational systems. This reinforces the idea that consciousness is not reducible to electrochemical exchanges. If the mind is not strictly material, it's not subject to the laws of material decay. Here we arrive at the logical conclusion of the discourse. If we accept the evidence that consciousness persists with severe deficit of brain tissue, abstract functions are not localizable, identity survives the separation of hemispheres, awareness continues during momentary clinical death, then we must reconsider what death is. Physical death is disintegration. A table rots. A body decomposes into its chemical elements. Matter disintegrates, but abstract concepts don't disintegrate. Think of the number 8. You can burn a sheet with 8 written on it, but you can't destroy the concept of the number 8. Non-material entities are not subject to entropy in the same way. If our consciousness, our capacity for abstraction, and our personal identity share this non-material nature, then a precise logic follows. That which is not composed of physical parts cannot disintegrate. The neurosurgeon proposes that death is the switching off of the biological switch, but that the signal, not being material, doesn't cease to exist. It continues in a state that no longer depends on sensory inputs from eyes or ears, but maintains its own integrity. NDEs suggest that this survival is not a black void, but a state of heightened perception, not limited by physical senses, a form of purely mental existence. This evidence doesn't tell us everything. It doesn't draw maps of otherworldly realms, but it tells us something fundamental about the here and now. Reductionism that sees man only as a packet of neurons is scientifically incomplete. Clinical data suggests that consciousness is a fundamental force, not a biological accident, and that the end of the body doesn't necessarily represent the end of the observer. If these arguments have made you reflect, let me know in the comments. Science advances when we're willing to look at data that doesn't fit into our pre-existing theories. Thank you for following me. See you next time.